before you can start 3D printing, you need to slice your 3D object. This basically converts the 3D mesh, which defines the edges and faces of your object, into a set of instructions for the 3D printer, telling it how to move the motors at what times. To do this, you'll need a slicing software. We'll use Cura. So if you don't already have Cura, go to your browser, search Cura, and just download the most recent version. Then you'll need to import the printers we use at TFS. So at school we have Ultimaker 2 Plus, Ultimaker 2 Plus Connect, which is most of the printers, and then we have a couple of S3 as well. Now S3 is mainly for soluble filament, so you don't need to use that yet, and if you do, that'll be a separate video. So we're going to use the Ultimaker 2 Plus Connect, and if you don't have it set up already, just click Add Printer. Then you need to choose your model. So you can either design your own, or you can go on Thingiverse and find one that's made already. So we'll just use a cat for this example. So we'll use this one, and to download it, you just go here, Files, and Download. Now we'll go back to Cura and import the model. So you click this button up here, and you choose your file and open. Now you have to orient your model properly so that it sticks to the build plate. So in this case, it's already done for us, but that might not always be the case. Some models you download won't be in the right direction, or if you design it yourself, you might also have to reorient it. The first thing you can do is just change the position on the build plate. This usually isn't an issue because it's just centered, but it could be. For example, if you want to multiply your model, you right click it and you multiply it. If you make a bunch of copies, then see how they're they're already arranged, but sometimes if you had other models with it as well, they might be on top of each other. So to do that, you just right click and select Arrange All Models. Now we're going to get rid of these ones, but then we can center that one as well. If we click it, center. So that's one thing. The next thing is scaling. If it's not already at the size you want, you can either scale it uniformly like this, or by typing a percentage, or you can just scale it in one direction. So for example, we could make it really tall, this, and just stretch it upwards. Now I'm going to just reset it to 100%. This next step is probably the most important of them all. This is orienting your model correctly, so rotating it in the right direction. There are a couple factors here. First, you want there to be enough area for it to stick properly to the build plate. And second, you want to minimize overhangs. If it's possible to print without supports, you want to do that. And basically, if there's more than 50-degree overhangs, some people say 45, but really with TFS's Ultimakers, you can go up to 50 degrees. So that tail, for example, would be 45 degrees overhang. If it was steeper, like if it went out at a higher angle, like this instead of this, so this would be like more like 50 degrees, then you might need supports if it's over 50 degrees. Basically, you want to minimize this effect. You want to make sure that there's nothing printing in midair. This is already the correct direction for this model, but here would be an example of a bad direction. Like that, for example. Now we have a couple areas which you see with red lines. That's printing in midair and that's printing in midair, so you would need supports. And in this print, we can print without supports, so we definitely want to do that. So we print it like this. Another possibility would be like this. But in this case, that whole bottom is printing in midair, so it's just the tail on the build plate. So even though there's area on the build plate, there's also a need for support, so this is also a bad direction. The original direction was correct. Now here's a couple tools for doing this quickly. You can click a face of the model that you want to put on the plate. For example, if we want to lay the cat on its face, we would do this. and basically it'll align that face with the build plate. This is also not a good direction because, as we saw, there's a little part of the feet that jut out, so the face wouldn't actually be sticking on the build plate. So that's another handy feature, this part where you just click a face and it puts it on the build plate. After you've done this, it's time to choose your filament, which you need to do at the printer. So after you chose your model, the next thing to do is go to the 3D printer and choose your filament, because to slice your file, you need to know what filament you're using. So I'm going to use eSun PLA. We have to change the filament. Here's how you do that. You click the filament button and you click change material. So it'll ask you, do you want to do it? Yes. Then right now it's set on generic PLA. You want to set it to the right type. So just always use this and set the type. Right now we're replacing it with eSun filament, which doesn't have an option here, so we just click generic PLA. But if you were using Ultimaker filament, you would just click the Ultimaker one. There'll be a similar PLA menu here. Then yes, you're sure. So now it's going to heat it. While it's heating, you open the nozzle at the back here, the lever, sorry, and you pull it out. So that's the current filament. Then always make sure that when you take it off the roll, that you roll it back up properly. Otherwise it can get tangled. So always roll it up. This one's already a bit tangled. So just roll the spool like this with the filament wrapping around. And then at the end, always make sure that you don't just leave this hanging. You have to put it in one of these holes like this. And maybe rip the blob of filament off. Like that. So now this is good. You can either put it down there or back on the rack. So I'm just going to put it on the rack. And here's our new spool. Now come back to the front of the printer and it should say that it's ready. So it'll say open the feeder lever, which we already did. We did that to unload the old one. And now you put the new one in. So we'll take this spool, see, we have this, and then back here, you insert it there, and you just have to push a little bit, not that much, but if it's not going, push a bit harder until it does, and then it's gonna go into the tube. And you just keep pushing it until it gets to the end. So now we come back here, and we're gonna see it's in the end. So you're supposed to push it until it's very close to the nozzle. Now you close the feeder, and you say material loaded. Then it's just gonna slowly extrude that material, and when it does, see, we're starting to get white, so it means it's pushing, but there's still a bit of white left in the nozzle. Then we click material is extruding. So just wait until it becomes the new color. If it's still sort of changing color, right now we have gray, so it still needs to put a bit more out, but when it turns to black, then we can just stop it. So that looks pretty good. Now we'll say there's a cooldown. You can skip that, but it doesn't really matter. Now you're ready for your next step. Now that you know what material you're using, you can go ahead and adjust your settings. So first, we have to select the correct material. We are using generic PLA, so that's already correct. If you were using Ultimaker, you would select Ultimaker. It doesn't really matter what color, but it just will change the temperature settings slightly to optimize it for that material. Now, generic is fine really for most filaments, so if you're not using Ultimaker PLA, just use generic. Next, we have to adjust some settings. So click these three lines and then go to advanced, because there's a few settings where basic doesn't show. To get a successful print, there honestly aren't a ton of settings you need to change, but I'll show you a few that are really important and that can help you optimize your printing. The first is layer height. So that's even built in to the program. There's a few default profiles. So really stick to normal for most things unless you need really high quality. I would never really go to extra fine. Fine is for quite high quality. Honestly, 0.2 even looks really great, so normal is more than good enough. That's just the layer height here. The next thing will be the wall thickness. 2 walls, or 0.8, because the nozzle diameter is 0.4 millimeters, is more than enough. It's really good for most prints. If you're designing something really strong that might need impacts, then you might want to go up to 3, but for anything just regular, 2 is fine. Then the top and bottom thickness. So you can usually leave that default. As long as you have 5 layers, you're good. If you're using really thick layer heights, then you don't need as many layers, and you probably want to go with like 0.8 if you are using 0.2, for example. Whereas if you're using really thin layer heights, you can actually go with a slightly smaller thickness, for example, 0.5, because you're still going to have 5 layers, so you're going to get a bit stronger. Now again, if you want really strong prints for high impact applications, for example, then you will maybe want to up this. But keep in mind that will also increase the weight. So if you're just trying to do something normal, you might as well save some material and use 5. It'll be more than enough. The next important setting is infill. So it's automatically at 20. You can put it to 18 and you'll still get great results. It doesn't really matter. I usually use 18 because it's sort of a balance between saving material and good quality. And the next important thing is the infill patterns. There are really a bunch, and for cosmetic stuff, again, it doesn't really matter, but for some things, you do want to choose a specific infill pattern. For really strong stuff, I would suggest cubic, but you can look through these on your own and just slice it and look at the preview and see what that looks like. For very large prints that don't need to be super strong inside, but just more cosmetics, like maybe if you're printing a large sculpture, I strongly recommend you use lightning. Basically, at the bottom of the print, it'll be almost hollow, but as you get close to the top walls, for example, the top of the head, it'll make more infill, and it saves filament, it reduces your print time, so it'll go away faster, and it's still strong enough. So that's really the best for large, not super strong objects. The material, you don't really need to change this because it's already in the profile, especially if you're using Ultimaker PLA, then you absolutely don't need to change it. If you've used the filament before and you find it wasn't working quite properly, then you might change it, but make sure you know what you're doing before this and look it up. The next thing is the speed. This also you shouldn't really have to change. Lower speeds generally do get higher quality, but it takes longer. So as a rule of thumb, just you can leave this default. You can speed it up slightly, but really don't go past 80 because then you're really going to start sacrificing quality. And unless you absolutely need it quickly, just leave it at 60. The next thing is travel and retraction. So this distance is fine. You need that amount, but one setting you really should change is Z-hop. Basically what this does is when it travels, it will lower the build plate so that the nozzle doesn't hit the print while it's traveling, and this can save prints that might otherwise fail. So you can leave that distance to 1 millimeter, that's fine, but make sure you turn this on. Cooling is fine. The last setting I suggest adjusting is your build plate adhesion. I suggest leaving the prime blob, which basically just extrudes a bit of filament at the start of the print. That won't affect your print. It just makes sure that there's filament in the nozzle. But then here, instead of the brim, I suggest a skirt, because a brim is basically going to wrap filament around the base of your print. Here, I'll show you what that looks like with a brim. Go on the preview. It looks like that. See how it'll be stuck at the bottom. And it does help adhesion to the build plate, but often you don't need it. Like this print, I would definitely go with skirt, which I usually set to 2 lines. And then you can see what that looks like. Basically, it just goes a lap about a couple millimeters away from the base of the print. And that way, as well as the prime blob, you've extruded some filament, and you now don't have to rip that extra piece off of your print. So it just saves you some post-processing time. The only time you should use brim is if you have a really small area to stick to the build plate. So if you had, for example, an area like one of those legs instead of all 4 of them, but you still had a large print on top, then you might want to use brim to prevent it from falling off. It just helps it stick better. But otherwise, I would use skirt. So for this, I'll use skirt. And that's really it. I suggest if you want to get to know these settings a bit more, just hover over them and it'll give you a bit of a description for each one. And you can really learn a lot about printing just from doing this. To do that, I would suggest looking at either expert or all of them, because you'll get to know more settings and some neat tricks you can use for more complicated prints. Once you have your profile, you can save it. I suggest saving it. So you can save it as a custom one and just give it a name. I'll call this test. Now it's time to slice. That basically just makes the code for the 3D printer. It's always also a good idea to look at the preview before printing to make sure it looks right. So yeah, that looks perfectly fine. Okay, so now that you've sliced your file, you insert the USB key, and if you don't have regular USB on your computer, you need an adapter from USB-C to regular USB. So you have your USB, and then you click on here, Save to Removable Drive. So wait, while it's saving, it'll say the file name. This is a cat, so calicat.ultimaker, and now you have to click eject. That just makes sure that it doesn't damage the file. So now we can take it out and go back to the printer. So you put it in the printer, and then the next step is to level the bed, because we aren't sure if it's level. If it's already level, or you know it's been leveled recently, you can skip this step, but generally it's good practice because you don't really know when the last person leveled it. So to level the bed, you click the little, I'll go back to show you that, the little screwdriver and wrench, that's like the maintenance tool. Then you can say level build plate. And now before you do this, if the build plate is at all dirty, so here if you look at that, you can see there's a little bit of filament there, there's some glue, it's sticky, so we need to clean it. To clean it, you just need a paper towel with water and a dry paper towel. So just wipe it a bit until all the glue's gone. If there's still glue left, like you can sort of see there, there's glue there. It's not just water. So you gotta keep wiping until the glue's gone. Otherwise, when you level it, you're actually leveling it with a layer of glue, and that's not really good because the glue isn't necessarily absolutely flat, and also if it gets clean between, or if you add more glue, then the level changes. So ideally you want to level it with no glue and then apply a thin layer of glue after you level it, and that'll give you a good print. If there's bits of filament like this, you have to rip them off. You might need some sort of metal tool for that, but not usually. Usually you can just use your nails. There, that's off now. Okay, so that's pretty clean now. Now we can click level build plate. For this procedure, you're going to need a sheet of regular paper. So you can just get this from the printer or find it in the class. First, you fold it in half, and this is going to be your calibration card. If you don't have this, but you have a calibration card which comes with these printers, that's actually even better to use, but a piece of paper folded in half is really close to the same thickness as a calibration card, so it's fine to use this. Then you go level build plate and you click start leveling. So it asks you now to do your calibration. You put the calibration card, so this piece of paper, under the nozzle. And right now we can't even fit it. Even if we try and push it, it's too tight. So this is really not level. This is not good. So if you go on the bottom, there's a screw back here and a screw here and here. So there's 3 screws. It's like a triangle. That is all your adjustments. So it's like it's a triangle for adjusting the level. It gives you a bit of options in all the axes. So basically you put the card under the nozzle and you're gonna tighten it. So righty tighty, lefty loosey. So you're tightening the screw, turning it right until this piece of paper will go under the nozzle. Okay, so now if we go back to the top, we can see this is going really easily. That's not quite enough tension. So it says here, until you feel some resistance when moving the card. So this is not really any resistance. Now turn the screw left to loosen it until you start to feel there'd be a little bit of pressure. Now it's still moving really easily, so keep going. Now it's really not moving at all. So that's pretty good. It's a little bit resistance. I can feel like it's not super easy to pull out, but it's also easy enough. So then we can go done adjusting, and it'll bring us to the next point. So now it'll bring us to this front corner. See, it goes over each one of these screws, basically. This one is already pretty good, actually. So you tighten the screw to bring the bed down, so more space. Now if we loosen the screw, we're making the space tighter here, and it's a little bit too much resistance. So we're gonna just leave that how it was. Done adjusting. Same thing here. It's already good. Done adjusting. Now this time, it's having us do it a second time. This is the fine tuning. So because you theoretically adjusted these screws the first time you did it, now the second time when you go to these 3 points, it might have changed. Like if you changed this point and this point and this point might have changed when you change these 2 points. So now you have to do this one again for fine tuning. Yeah, and it did a little bit when we adjusted that one. Now this one's pretty loose, so I'm gonna tighten it just a bit. Or loosen the screw to tighten it on the top. That's pretty good. Now we're gonna go done adjusting. And it just makes you do that 1 point. The other ones are okay. After you level the bed, you should put a thin layer of glue to make sure that your print sticks. So just shake this a bit and then press it. You don't really have to squeeze the bottle that much. You more just press it and squeeze a little bit. And you don't need that much. See, just that little dab should actually be enough for the whole bed. Now, see how there's a sponge on the tip? You use the actual bottle to apply the glue on the whole bed. And if you're just printing a small thing in the middle, you don't have to apply it on the whole bed. You can just put it in the middle. If you didn't level the bed and you see someone already put glue, you can use that same application of glue for your print. You don't have to put a new application of glue each time. So just do that and then make sure that there's no big globs like there. That's sort of a lot of glue in one spot. So I'm just gonna go over that a little bit more, and now we can see it's a bit smoother. And there you have it. Now you're ready to start your print. To print, which is really your end goal, you can just click select from USB, and then we printed a cat. So there, Cali Cat. You click your print, it'll show a little preview there, and print. And there we have it. That's how you do it. So once you start your print, you should wait a few minutes for it to start. The first layer of the print is really the most important part of the whole thing.
you need good adhesion, especially if it has a large area. If it has a large area and the bed's not level, it really won't stick properly, or even if the bed's level but that first layer doesn't go well because maybe there's a blob on the nozzle or something, the whole print might fail. So you need to wait for that first layer to make sure it goes well, and then you can leave it, and it should go up. Yeah.